When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong.
I talk a lot on this channel about class struggle and the power imbalance between worker and boss, capitalist and proletarian if you want to use Marxist terminology, and it struck me that I'm quite fond of explaining how things will be better after the revolution, and that's true, they will be, don't get me wrong, but I feel like I don't really talk much about how to improve things in the here and now, because it's very easy to get stuck in the mindset of things will just get better after we take control, and become complacent. So I'm making a conscious choice to talk more about that side of things. By this point I've probably finished and uploaded my landlords video, and I hope to make a few more like that, including this video today. So, how do we address the power imbalance between workers and employers? The answer is simple: unionize. The bosses need workers significantly more than the workers need bosses, and whilst the individual worker has little power to demand better, workers as a group, as an organised force, hold all the power in the workplace. If your workplace organises and decides collectively to strike, to lay down your tools, not touch your keyboards, etc., and refuse to work until you receive better working conditions, your employer can basically do nothing but capitulate to your demands. But maybe that's not enough for you. Maybe some of you out there are less far left than me, or just don't see the appeal, and think I'm the left-wing equivalent of a Jehovah's Witness, bothering you incessantly and preaching gospel at you. So rather than talk ideology, I'll instead explain to you in simple terms why, in my opinion, you should join a union, regardless of your political affiliations or job status.
It is we who plowed the prairies, built the cities where they trade, dug the mines and built the workshops, endless miles of railroad laid. We stand outcast and starve amidst the wonders we have made, but the union makes us strong.
First of all, we must discuss what unions have already done, because I honestly don't think all that many people realise this, and also to demonstrate that unionising has a long, proud history of various successes, some of which I'll go over now. Think about your workplace. Think about how your workplace would have been during the 19th century. Would it have been better? Worse? Would you have had more rights? Less? Inevitably, you have to agree with me that workers' rights have improved since the Victorian age, so why is that? Well, the simple answer is that almost every single right that we as workers enjoy was at some point in the past fought for, often at the cost of many, many lives. Trade union movements exist to challenge the status quo and to demand better working conditions, many of which might cost employers profits, so often trade union movements have been cruelly crushed by employers. Take the Ludlow massacre as an example. These workers decided to strike for better conditions, and as a result 20 people were killed, 13 of them children. But maybe I'm being too general, so allow me to be more specific for you. Here's a list of benefits we enjoy today that the labour movement of the past suffered, fought, and in some cases died for. Hour limits. Just as an example, here in the UK, the longest week one can work without explicitly giving permission is 48 hours per week, though most people don't actually work that because, surprise surprise, exhausted workers affects productivity. In France it's 35 and so on and so forth, but this wasn't always the case. Before 1833 there was no limit placed upon working hours in the UK at all. In 1833, the Parliament enacted the Factory Act, limiting children aged 9 to 13 to 8 hours per day, or the average shift of a worker in most Western countries today, and children 14 to 18 to 12 hours a day. I don't know about you, but I've worked 12-hour shifts myself as an adult, doing what I would consider horrible, menial work, but as a 14-year-old child sweeping chimneys, most of these work time directives throughout the world were achieved through union action and strikes. In the US, various separate movements rose up and slowly spread the idea. In Spain, this was achieved in 1919 after a 44-day general strike. In France, it came about as a way to appease the people and diminish support for communist movements. In Russia, Mexico, and Germany, it came after violent revolutions in the early 20th century. Workers in New Zealand were able to simply demand it due to a shortage of workers at the time, and the list goes on, you get the point. It was strikes and struggle that brought us what I would actually argue is still too long of a working day, considering that productivity has skyrocketed, and not only have our hours remained the same, but our wages have as well. But this is just one example of many, many similar situations. What else have the trade unions done for the average worker? Well, allow me to list just a few more things for you. I won't go into depth with them as I have here because there's very similar stories behind each one and I don't want to have to repeat myself. But I just want to make the point that for each of these rights that we take for granted, there is a long and often bloody history of workers of the past fighting and even dying to attain them for us. Enacting child labour laws, improving workplace conditions and introducing health and safety regulations, paid retirement and work pensions, sick pay, paid holidays, the minimum wage, holding employers to keeping to the terms of contracts. Previously, only employees could be sued for a breach. Maternity and paternity leave, and the right not to be fired for having a baby. Equality laws. Unions have a long and proud history of winning rights for the average worker, much of which I haven't mentioned. That was, if you can believe it, an incomplete list, but I would urge you to look it up if you're interested.
All the world that's owned by idle drones is ours and ours alone. We have laid the wide foundation, built it skyward stone by stone. It is ours not to slave in, but to master and to own, while the union makes us strong.
This is both trivial and incredibly difficult to answer, since it would be easy for me to simply answer with, look at what the unions have already achieved. All it takes is support to enable them to continue improving rights and conditions. The current Trade Union Council, or TUC for example, is considering campaigning for further reducing the working hours in the UK to 30, and with enough support they can do it. But I'm not going to just do that, because that feels a little bit of a cop-out, and I don't want to sit here and tell you that you should join an organisation now because of what similar organisations did several decades ago. So instead I'll go through the many ways in which trade unions can help you, the average worker, in your day-to-day life without having to rely on the impressive legacy of union organisers of the past. Here is exactly why you should join a union right now. You could earn more. Due to the power of collective bargaining, unionised workplaces on average pay 10% more than those that don't have recognition, more holidays and better parental leave. If you don't feel like you get enough holiday, or your paternity or maternity leave isn't sufficient, then good news, unions can help you fight for more time off, either to help with the first year or so with your child, or simply because you need a break. Unions in Italy, just as an example, have already managed to do this, which is why Italy has the most paid holiday in Europe. A fairer contract. In most workplaces, your contract is specifically set up to benefit the company over you. After all, the company draws up the contract. But with a union, you can more easily negotiate terms to get a better deal for employees. Just as an example, my current contract necessitates opting out of the 48-hour working directive, to which we have to give the company 3 months' notice to opt back into, meaning that in theory, the company could make us work 100 hours a week with no additional remuneration. My workplace is not in fact unionised, though not from lack of trying on my part, but if and when it does happen, changing that will be at the top of the list of demands we take to management. Safer work conditions. There are, on average, 50% less accidents in unionised workplaces. That's half, meaning that in ununionised workplaces, you are twice as likely to suffer an avoidable accident at work. Help with official action. This is probably the thing everyone knows about unions, and arguably the most tangible benefit. If you have any kind of disciplinary, if you get in any trouble at work, and you get called into a recorded meeting, as a union member, you no longer have to go in alone with your potentially limited knowledge of employment law and your own rights. You have the legal right to be accompanied by a union representative who can stick up for you and make sure that the company is treating you fairly. You can also build a case for your defence with them. This is not just for disciplinaries, you can also take a rep in with you if you raise a grievance against the manager or co-worker. Think of them as a bit like a defence lawyer. Help and support whenever you need it. The union's resources, advice and expertise are yours to utilise, most of the time just a phone call or an email away. Depending on the specific union, you might even gain access to free legal advice or support in taking your employer to a tribunal. Better training. Do you feel like your employer has poorly prepared you to carry out your job or cut your training short to save money? A union can make sure that you never feel unequipped by putting pressure on employers to provide adequate training. Better job security. Trade union members, on average, have greater job security, not least because unions actively fight for employee rights, and as mentioned above, can help fight your corner in any official action. Additionally, unions can help get you severance or redundancy packages if for any reason you're made redundant. Have your say. Most workplaces do not give you any say in the way things are run. Unions can help you fight back against certain company policies you feel are unfair or discriminatory. Fight back! If you feel in any way mistreated, abused, manipulated, controlled, or in any way treated in a way that you feel is unacceptable by your employer, a union can help you fight back. Find justice, and make sure that you're not alone or without a voice. From helping fight your corner in official actions to organising to get better wages, unions can and will help to tip the employer-employee power imbalance.
Is there aught we hold in common with the greedy parasite who would lash us into serfdom and would crush us with his might? Is there anything left to us but to organize and fight, for the union makes us strong?
Before we finish up, I just have a couple of things to clarify. First of all, we need to talk about recognition. In most workplaces, you have almost all the benefits of a trade union, but without union recognition, you as workers are less able to bargain collectively, at least without striking, etc., because there is no direct line of communication between the union and the company, and it's more difficult to organise within the workplace. However, it is relatively simple to change this or to force recognition. It's a relatively simple process, as I'll now go over. First thing to do is to recruit at least 10% of your workplace into the same union, more on which to choose in a moment, as this is the minimum amount of workers a union needs to force recognition. Unfortunately, you can't immediately jump into recognition via class struggle. The law specifically states that you first must ask the company nicely if you can be recognised, and if they agree, that's literally as simple as it gets. Unfortunately, however, employers have almost nothing to gain from willingly agreeing to recognise a union, as unions exist to shift the balance of power away from the bosses to the workers, and so the vast majority of the time they will refuse this request. Once your employer inevitably refuses to recognise your union after the 10-day limit, you'll then be able to force recognition by applying to the Central Arbitration Committee, or CAC, a department of ACAS. In order to do so, you will need not only proof of your 10% membership, but also proof that a majority of workers in your workplace are in favour of recognition, usually in the form of a petition, which 51% or more of your colleagues have signed, which shouldn't be too difficult. After all, they don't have to join, they just have to sign your petition saying you can do a thing that doesn't affect them in any way. Once you've provided all of this, ACAS can force your employer to recognise the union, provided you meet the above requirements, although there are certain situations in which you can still be rejected at this point. For example, if the union has applied for recognition within the last 3 years, they can't do so until 3 years have passed. If the union you're using is not an official certified independent union, if your workplace already recognises a different union, or if another union has applied, successfully or unsuccessfully, in the time that you have also applied. Secondly, we need to discuss the fact that most unions are extremely specific to certain sectors or jobs, and a lot of the time it's best to look these up, since often more general unions might not be best suited to you if you work in a sector that has a union specific to it. For example, if you're a musician, then the musicians union might be better suited to your needs than, for example, Unite. That's not to say these are all ideal or better than the general unions, that's just something you'll need to look into and discover for yourself, but they may have resources and reps that are more suited to your needs. Of course, you can always be a member of both, there's nothing to stop you doing that. In fact, it's very common when your recognised sector-specific union is necessary but not ideal. For example, the reps are not as good but the resources are important. You can be represented by any union you choose. You don't actually need recognition to get the majority of benefits of a union. This is called dual carding and is more common than one might think. This isn't something I can be general on, unfortunately. It's something that you'll have to look into yourself on a case-by-case basis. So the question, which union should I join, is a difficult one to satisfactorily answer because it varies. Most of the time, if your company already has a recognised union, you'd probably benefit from being a member of that one, but beyond that it's really up to you. The bigger unions do benefit from increased membership and resources, but there is a widely perpetuated adage that says that the more members a union has, the more power it has, and to an extent that's true, but this can often not be the case. Sure, the bigger unions might have more resources, but they also have a lot more bureaucracy, are more easily swayed by big business, and can lose a lot of their radical elements as they become more about business than class struggle. Unite, for example, occasionally cold call me to try and sell me insurance. So think carefully about what's more important to you, or as I just mentioned, dual card and get the best of both worlds, which is what I do. I appreciate of course that this isn't possible for everyone. For what it's worth, I'm a member of both Unite, which gives me access to their resources, and the IWW, which is a union that I'm more ideologically aligned with, and basically are the labour movement of the early 20th century. I'll probably do a separate video about the IWW and its history, because it's honestly both fascinating and impressive and deserves much more focus than I'm able to give it here.
Solidarity forever! Solidarity forever! Solidarity forever! For the union makes us strong.
So there you have it. I can't force you to join a union, of course, but I hope I've shown you that doing so will be a great benefit in the long term. Even if you don't use any of their services and don't see the benefit immediately, you never know when you might need to. You are at the mercy of your employer after all, and you never know when you might need someone to have your back. It's kind of like insurance in that way, I suppose. All of these benefits unions afford us, not even including the simple fact that United workers have power or other class struggle related reasons, and all for what basically amounts to a Netflix subscription. I'd say it's worth it, but I'll leave it in your more than capable hands.
There is power in a man to working folk.